Borders are reasonable. How about that? The law is the border that stops someone from stealing your laptop. And if it's an Apple laptop, well, it's the sort of laptop that a social justice warrior would carry. And then the social justice warrior is going to be very irritated if you happen to purloin their laptop. And then you might point out to them, you know, it's a border that protects you from having that thing taken. And they say, well, the border should be open. It's okay, man, no problem. You hand over that laptop right now. And everything else you own too. If you don't like borders, and you can get rid of the damn walls in your house, and you don't need doors on your bedroom either. And we can keep an eye on you whenever we want. And so much for borders. One of the things that really differs between liberals and conservatives, between the left and the right, is the right likes tight borders between things. It's part of being conscientious at every level, conceptually, sexually, familially, provincially, nationally. The right says, look, let's keep the borders between things pretty distinct. And the left says, yeah, maybe not, because some of those borders are in the wrong place, and a little bit more free flow of information wouldn't be a bad thing. And the thing is, they're right, but so are the conservatives, and that's why you have to talk. It's like, well, we've got some borders. That's a good thing. Maybe some of them need to be moved around a little bit, and that's what the political dialogue is for. But that doesn't mean that borders themselves are a bad idea. They're a great idea, because without borders, everything mashes into the same untenable state of undifferentiated chaos, and you can't live in that. And so the people who are trying to tear down the borders conceptually, politically, and practically, what they want is the chaos that would bring. They either want that, or they're too foolish to know that their pursuits will produce that. So let's be a little bit clear that if you stand up and say, yeah, borders, they're okay. They've got their problems, but they're okay. That doesn't make you a bigot beyond redemption. It just makes you someone with some sense. And it's actually okay to be someone with some sense. Limits on immigration are also reasonable. Well, we need to figure out what those limits are. And that's what the bloody political dialogue is for. But the fact that it should be limited to some degree is also reasonable. Otherwise, why not just open the borders and let everybody come in? Well, the reason you don't do that is because a complex system cannot tolerate extensive transformation over too short a period of time. Now, you want immigrants to come in, especially if they're the sorts of immigrants who are likely to contribute properly to the success of your polity. And lots of immigrants do that. I mean, I think the vast majority, for example, of entrepreneurs in the United States come from the Indian subcontinent. So great, you know, bring them over. They're highly educated, they're extraordinarily productive, they make lots of new businesses, and then they pump money like mad back into India. Good deal. But that doesn't mean that we have our arms are open to everyone immigration policy, because it's complete rubbish. All that means is you're not thinking about it. So, and here's a coda to that for conservatives. Here's something. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It should not be assumed that citizens of societies that have not evolved functional individual rights predicated polities will hold values in keeping with such polities. So we could say, look, there are a lot of countries in the world that are not governed well. The vast majority of them, right? And they've been not governed well forever. And to me, that means that there's something wrong with the values that are held collectively by the people who've established those polities. Well, you shouldn't be naive and assume that merely because you move them to a new country, they're going to let their innate democratic longings flourish. It doesn't work that way. So if you stand up and say, look, you know, let's be a little cautious. Let's make sure that we don't transform our society so rapidly that we lose what we have. Let's be careful about that. That doesn't mean that you're a morally reprehensible demon. It just means that you're conservative, and it's a reasonable position to hold. So there's no sense in apologizing for it. Now, that doesn't mean you get to, like, hide your bigotry under a mask of moral virtue, you know. The discrimination issue is quite clear as far as I'm concerned, so that's associated with bigotry. If you have two people who are applying for a job, you should pick the one that's most qualified and not pay any attention to any of the other attributes of the person that have nothing to do with the job. Okay. Right. I think, basically, I think we figured that out in about 1965. Now, we're not doing it perfectly, you know, but it's not that much later than 1965, and our society, particularly in Canada, is pretty damn open. You can come in here, and if you work hard, and if you're fortunate, you don't get sick, and God smiles on you, so to speak, you can be successful. There's still prejudice, unreasonable prejudice and discrimination, but our society is not, as the radical egalitarian equity promoters have it, structurally racist, bigoted, and misogynistic. No. Not only that, just so you know, there was a recent review published, and I mean recent, 2017, looking at that damn literature on unconscious bias. And I knew the literature to begin with. There is no evidence that unconscious bias can be measured properly, not reliably. There's also no evidence whatsoever that if you do measure it, and you can't very well, that it does any better job of predicting actual, say, bias and prejudice than just tests of attitude. So the notion that our culture is somehow structurally misogynistic and racist, and the reason for that is because of the unconscious bias of the monsters who are running it is well, maybe it's not wrong, but I can tell you one thing about it. It is not a scientifically justifiable proposition, and that's what it's being passed off as. And I place that firmly at the feet of the social psychologists, which social psychology happens to be a fairly corrupt discipline, by the way, and the people who invented the implicit association test, which measures unconscious bias, because they have not come out publicly to the degree that they should have and said, our test, which was for experimental purposes, is being misused politically. You know, your damn judges now, because of federal fiat, have to undergo mandatory unconscious bias retraining before they can sit on the bench. And so you don't think that's political re-education, it's because you're not paying attention. And there's zero evidence that it does what it's supposed to. And I would also recommend to all of you, if you happen to be in a workplace that introduces diversity training or unconscious bias training as a mandatory requirement, you tell them in no uncertain terms that you are not participating in a process that deems you bigoted and misogynistic without evidence of that being the case. And if you trot off to the training, then you've just agreed that that's who you are. And believe me, once you've agreed to that, man, you'll be agreeing to a bunch of things you don't want to agree soon afterwards. So it's time just to put a stop to that. Enough of that. None of that unconscious bias retraining, especially not the mandatory type.